The Barrett M82 weighed 32 pounds, but in Evelyn Thomas's trembling hands, it felt like the weight of the world. The desert wind whipped across the Afghan mountainside, carrying with it the acrid smell of gunpowder and the distant echo of small arms fire. At 18 years old, she had been a Marine for exactly 7 months, 3 days, and 14 hours. In 30 seconds, she would become a legend. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Thomas, you copy? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled through her headset, urgent but controlled. The veteran sniper lay prone beside her, his weathered face pressed against his own scope. 23 years in the Corps had taught him to read situations like scripture. And right now, every verse spoke of danger. Evelyn's breathing came in short, controlled bursts as she peered through Barrett's scope. 2 miles away, across a valley that looked like God had carved it with an angry fist, 3 Taliban fighters were setting up what appeared to be a mortar position. Between them and her squad lay Bravo Company 42 Marines pinned down in a dried river, their calls for immediate fire support growing more desperate by the minute. "I see them, Staff Sergeant," Evelyn whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. Her finger rested alongside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger itself, a discipline beaten into her during those grueling weeks at Camp Pendleton. Her instructor's voice echoed in her memory. "The trigger is a sacred thing, Thomas. You don't touch it until you're ready to change someone's world forever." Beside her, Lance Corporal Mike Chun shifted nervously, his M4 carbine trained on the approaches to their position. At 21, he was the old man of their 3-person team, though his boyish face made him look younger than Evelyn. "Jesus Christ, that's a hell of a shot," he muttered, adjusting his body armor. 2 miles in this wind? The third member of their overwatch position, Corporal Sarah Rodriguez, kept her eyes on her spotting scope, calling out wind readings and range estimations with mechanical precision. At 24, she had already completed 2 tours, and her steady demeanor had become Evelyn's anchor during their 6 weeks together. Winds gusting 8 to 12 miles per hour northwest, range 2,100 meters. Target is... Fuck, they're moving fast. Through her scope, Evelyn watched the enemy fighters work with practiced efficiency. They had done this before set up their mortar, rain hell on American forces, then disappear into the mountains like ghosts. The mathematics of war played out in her mind. Trajectory, wind compensation, bullet drop, target movement. But beneath the calculations, something else stirred a cold certainty that felt older than her 18 years. The radio crackled again. This time with a different voice. Captain Williams, Bravo Company Commander, his usually composed tone edged with desperation. "Overwatch 1, we need that fire mission now. Taking heavy casualties. Repeat, heavy casualties." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez adjusted his position, his knee bumping against Evelyn's elbow. "Thomas, I know what you're thinking, but that's an impossible shot. Longest confirmed kill in Afghanistan is 1,800 meters. This is 2,100 and change," Evelyn finished quietly, her eye still pressed to the scope. "I know, Staff Sergeant." Barrett felt different now in her hands, less like a foreign object and more like an extension of her will. She had been shooting since she was 7 years old, starting with her grandfather's .22 rifle behind their farmhouse in rural Montana. Thomas Eugene Thomas, named after a grandfather he'd never met, had been a Marine himself. Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. His Purple Heart sat in the shadow box above their fireplace, next to a faded photograph of him looking impossibly young in dress blues. The day she enlisted, his weathered hands shaking as he pinned his bronze star to her civilian jacket. "But pride doesn't stop bullets, Evelyn. You remember that." Now 2 miles from home and 8,000 miles from Montana, those words felt prophetic. Pride don't stop bullets. But maybe, just maybe, The right bullet could stop a lot of dying. Target has mortar tube vertical, Martinez called out her voice tense. They're about to fire. Through the scope, Evelyn could see the lead fighter, a tall man with a distinctive white head wrap, gesturing to his companions. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this dance many times before, who knew that American forces couldn't reach them at this distance. The mortar tube angled downward toward the dried riverbed where Bravo Company lay trapped. Staff. Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would haunt and honor him for the rest of his career. Thomas, it's your call, but if you miss, I won't miss. The words came from somewhere deeper than confidence, somewhere beyond the realm of 18-year-old bravado. Evelyn's body seemed to settle into the ground, becoming one with the rocky outcropping that served as their hide. Her breathing slowed, each exhale timed to the rhythm of her heartbeat. The world narrowed to the circle of her scope, to the crosshairs that danced slightly in the wind. She thought of her mother, standing in their kitchen 3 months ago, tears streaming down her face as she watched the news. Another bombing in Kandahar, another convoy hit by an IED. Why couldn't you have been content with college? But contentment had never been Evelyn's nature. Even as a child, she had been drawn to the edge of things, climbing the highest trees, swimming in the deepest parts of the river, pushing herself and everyone around her to go further, reach higher, be better. The Marines hadn't made her this way. They had simply given her a direction to aim that restless energy. Winds dropping, Martinez whispered. 5 miles per hour, northwest. Target is. Shit, he's kneeling by the mortar. Evelyn made microscopic adjustments to her scope, compensating for wind drift and bullet drop. The .50 caliber round would take approximately 3 seconds to reach its target, traveling at over 2,800 feet per second. In those 3 seconds, the target could move, the wind could shift. 100 variables could transform a perfect shot into a near miss. In combat, near misses weren't just failures, they were death sentences for the Marines counting on her. The radio crackled with increasing urgency. Bravo Company was taking effective fire from multiple positions. Without the Overwatch team's intervention, they would be forced to call in danger close artillery, risking their own forces in a desperate attempt to break contact. The decision tree had collapsed down to a single branch. Evelyn shot. She centered. The crosshairs on the fighter's torso, accounting for his movement, the wind, the curvature of the earth itself. Her finger moved to the trigger, and in that moment, everything her grandfather had taught her crystallized into perfect clarity, using the nickname only he was allowed to use. It's about stillness. Finding that place inside yourself where everything stops moving and then letting the bullet find its own way home. Send it, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez whispered. Evelyn Thomas, 18 years old, 7 months in the Corps, took a breath, held it halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared like an angry god, the muzzle brake redirecting gases that kicked up a cloud of dust and debris around their position. The recoil hammered into Evelyn's shoulder, a familiar violence that she absorbed without flinching. Through her scope, she watched the bullets trace, a barely visible line of disturbed air that seemed to hang in space for an eternity. 3 seconds, 2 miles, 1 shot. And then the impossible happened. The fighter in the white head wrap stumbled backward, his arms windmilling as if trying to catch his balance against the sky itself. For a moment that lasted forever, he stood frozen at the edge of comprehension, looking down at his chest with the expression of a man who had just been told a joke he didn't understand. Then he collapsed, and the mountains echoed with a silence that felt like the world holding its breath. "Holy shit," Chun breathed, his voice filled with something that might have been awe or terror. "Holy fucking shit, she got him." Through her scope, Evelyn watched the remaining fighters scatter like startled birds, abandoning their mortar and fleeing into the rocks. But she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. The Barrett lay across her shoulder like a sleeping beast, still warm from its moment of fury. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was already on the radio, his voice steady but underlaid with amazement. "Base, this is Overwatch 1. Target neutralized. Bravo Company, you are clear to move." Martinez lowered her spotting scope and stared at Evelyn with something approaching religious wonder. 2,137 meters, she said quietly. "Jesus Christ, Thomas. 2,137 meters. But Evelyn wasn't listening to the congratulations or the radio chatter or the distant sounds of Bravo Company beginning their extract. She was thinking about the moment the bullet had found its mark, about the way the fighter had looked down at his chest with such profound surprise. She was thinking about her grandfather's bronze star, and her mother's tears, and the weight of 32 pounds that had somehow become the weight of the world. In the distance, a helicopter appeared on the horizon, coming to extract Bravo Company from their exposed position. The crisis was over, the immediate danger past. But something else had begun, something that would follow Evelyn Thomas for the rest of her life, something that would transform 18-year-old farm girl from Montana into a legend whispered about in barracks and briefing rooms around the world. The shot that had traveled 2 miles in 3 seconds had also traveled into history, carrying with it the name of the youngest Marine ever to make a confirmed kill at extreme range. But legends, Evelyn would learn, were just another kind of weight to carry. As the dust settled around their position and the adrenaline began to fade, she realized that the hardest part wasn't making the shot. The hardest part would be living with what came after. 3 weeks after the shot was heard across 2 continents, Evelyn Thomas sat in the chow hall at Forward Operating Base, Sharana, mechanically working through a plate of what the Marines generously called Salisbury steak. Around her, the normal chaos of military dining continued. Conversations about home, complaints about the heat, endless speculation about when they might rotate back to the States. But Evelyn ate in relative silence, uncomfortably aware that conversation seemed to pause when she passed, that groups of Marines would glance her way and whisper among themselves. The story had grown in the telling, as military stories always did. 2,100 meters had become 2,200, then 23. The single shot had become a rapid series of precision strikes that had single-handedly broken an entire Taliban offensive. The 18-year-old farm girl had become some kind of supernatural sniper, a ghost who could reach across mountains and touch death itself. "Mind if I sit?" The voice belonged to Major Patricia Hayes, the battalion's intelligence officer. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned her rank through competence rather than politics. Evelyn had seen her around the FA but had never spoken to her directly. "Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Please sit." Evelyn started to rise, but Major Hayes waved her back down. "Relax, Thomas. This isn't official." The major settled into her chair with the careful movements of someone whose body had been shaped by years of military service. "How are you holding up?" It was a simple question, but it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. How was she holding up? She wasn't sleeping well, waking several times each night with the image of the fighter in the white headwrap burned into her retinas. She wasn't eating well, her appetite seemingly having vanished somewhere in the mountains. She wasn't talking well either, finding it increasingly difficult to connect with her fellow Marines, who now seemed to view her as something other than human. "I'm fine, ma'am," she said automatically. The response drilled into every Marine since boot camp. Major Hayes smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. "That's Marine speak for I'm drowning but too proud to ask for help. I've been there, Thomas. We all have." The major's meal tray held the same questionable Salisbury steak, but she attacked it with apparent enthusiasm. Between bites, she continued talking, her voice pitched low enough that their conversation remained private. I made my first kill when I was 22. Not nearly as dramatic as yours, close quarters, urban environment, No room for doubt or hesitation. But afterward, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped out something essential. Evelyn looked up from her plate, meeting the Major's eyes for the first time. Did it get better? That depends on what you mean by better. Major Hayes paused, considering her words carefully. The hollow feeling went away, eventually. But it got replaced by something else. An understanding that I was capable of taking human life, that I could make that decision and live with it. Some people find that realization liberating. Others find it terrifying. Most of us find it both. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who approached their table with the careful deliberation of someone navigating a minefield. "Excuse me, Major Thomas, when you're finished here, Colonel Morrison wants to see you." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Colonel Morrison commanded the entire forward operating base, a man whose attention was generally reserved for court-martials and medal ceremonies. "Do you know what about Staff Sergeant?" "Negative, but you might want to hurry." Rodriguez glanced at Major Hayes, some unspoken communication passing between them. "He's got some visitors with him, Pentagon types." Major Hayes stood, gathering her tray. "Thomas, remember what I said. And remember that being good at something doesn't mean you have to like it." She paused at the edge of the table. "But it does mean you have a responsibility to be better." The walk to the command bunker felt like a death march. Evelyn's mind raced through every possible infraction, every regulation she might have violated, every reason the Pentagon might send representatives to a forward operating base in the middle of Afghanistan. She had always been a good Marine, not perfect but consistent, reliable, the kind of soldier who followed orders and kept her nose clean. But extraordinary situations she was learning had their own rules. The command bunker was a testament to military pragmatism: reinforced concrete walls, redundant communications equipment, and maps covering every surface. Colonel Morrison sat behind a metal desk that had seen better decades, his usually immaculate uniform showing the wear of 12 months in combat. Beside him stood two individuals who clearly didn't belong. A man in his 50s wearing the kind of suit that cost more than most Marines made in a month, and a woman whose bearing screamed military intelligence despite her civilian clothes. "Private First Class Thomas reporting as ordered, sir," Evelyn said, snapping to attention with the kind of precision that would have made her drill instructors proud. "Colonel." Morrison looked up from the folder he had been reading her service record, she realized with growing unease. "At ease, Thomas. Take a seat." He gestured to a folding chair positioned directly across from his desk. "I'd like you to meet Mr. Davidson from the Department of Defense and Agent Williams from, well, let's just say she works for people who are very interested in your recent performance." Mr. Davidson stepped forward, his smile polished but not quite reaching his eyes. "Private Thomas, congratulations on your exceptional marksmanship. What you accomplished 3 weeks ago was truly remarkable." Agent Martinez remained silent, but Evelyn could feel her being evaluated, dissected, catalogued. It was the kind of attention that made her skin crawl, the sensation of being studied like a specimen under a microscope. "Thank you, sir," Evelyn replied, though she wasn't sure if thanks were appropriate or even desired. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Thomas, your shot has attracted considerable attention. The longest confirmed kill in Afghanistan, made by the youngest Marine sniper in the Corps. That kind of achievement doesn't go unnoticed, especially not in Washington." Mr. Davidson opened a leather portfolio and removed a single sheet of paper. "We're here to discuss your future, Private. Your skills represent a significant asset to national security, and we believe there are opportunities for you to serve your country in ways that go far beyond traditional infantry operations." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, heavy with implications that Evelyn wasn't sure she wanted to understand. "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not sure what you mean." Agent Martinez finally spoke, her voice carrying the flat tones of someone accustomed to delivering uncomfortable truths. What he means is that your skills create opportunities most Marines never see, Agent Williams said. Your performance has opened doors that most Marines never even know exist. Evelyn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I just did my job, ma'am. I saw a target. I engaged the target. I eliminated the threat to my fellow Marines. And that's exactly why you're valuable, Mr. Davidson said, his smile widening. No hesitation, no second-guessing, no political considerations. Just pure professional competence applied with surgical precision. Colonel Morrison cleared his throat, a sound that carried warning. Thomas, I want you to understand that whatever these people are offering, whatever opportunities they're presenting, you have choices. You're not obligated to do anything beyond completing your current tour and fulfilling your existing commitment to the Corps. The tension in the room ratcheted up several degrees. Mr. Davidson's smile faltered slightly, while Agent Martinez's expression hardened into something approaching hostility. Evelyn realized she was witnessing a bureaucratic battle being fought over her future, with her as both the prize and the weapon. Of course she has choices, Mr. Davidson said, though his tone suggested otherwise. We're simply here to ensure she understands all the options available to someone with her unique talents. Agent Martinez stepped closer, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Private Thomas, how would you feel if I told you that there are threats to American security that can't be addressed through conventional military operations, targets that require precision engagement from extended ranges? The euphemisms were elegant, but their meaning was crystal clear. They weren't talking about military service in any traditional sense. They were talking about assassination, about becoming a tool for covert operations that would never appear in any official record. The realization hit Evelyn like a physical blow, leaving her momentarily breathless. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Mr. Davidson nodded as if he had expected this response. Of course. This is a significant decision, one that shouldn't be made lightly. He placed a business card on Colonel Morrison's desk. My contact information. Take all the time you need, but remember that opportunities like this don't remain open indefinitely. After the visitors departed, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with unspoken implications, Colonel Morrison poured himself a cup of coffee that had been sitting on a hot plate for what looked like hours. He didn't offer any to Evelyn, but he didn't dismiss her either. Sir, may I speak freely? She asked. Go ahead, Thomas. What just happened here? Colonel Morrison took a long sip of his coffee, grimacing slightly at what was undoubtedly a bitter brew. What happened is that you demonstrated exceptional competence in your military specialty, and that competence has attracted the attention of people who believe they can find better uses for your talents than serving with a line infantry unit. Better uses? Different uses. Whether they're better depends on your perspective. The colonel set down his cup and looked directly at Evelyn, his expression serious but not unkind. Thomas, you're 18 years old. You've been in the Corps for less than 8 months. You have your entire career ahead of you, assuming you want to make this a career. What those people are offering, it's not a career. It's a different kind of life entirely. Evelyn felt as if she were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into an abyss whose depth she couldn't fathom. What would you do, sir? In my position? Colonel Morrison's laugh was short and bitter. I'd probably run screaming in the opposite direction. But then again, I never made a 2,100-meter shot when I was 18 years old. That kind of capability comes with its own set of responsibilities, its own moral weight. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the bunker door. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared, looking slightly out of breath. Sir, sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation developing. Intelligence indicates possible Taliban activity in Sector 7, approximately 2 kilometers from our outer perimeter. Colonel Morrison was on his feet immediately, the bureaucratic visit forgotten in the face of immediate tactical concerns. What kind of activity? Unknown number of fighters, possibly setting up an observation post or forward position. Requesting immediate reconnaissance and possible interdiction. The colonel looked at Evelyn, and she could see him making calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics. Thomas, you're qualified on the Barrett system, correct? Yes, sir. And your team is ready for immediate deployment? Yes, sir. Then get your gear. Looks like we're about to find out if that shot 3 weeks ago was skill or luck. As Evelyn left the command bunker, her mind reeled with the weight of multiple realizations. The shot that had made her famous had also made her a target for forces she barely understood. The skills that made her valuable to the Marine Corps also made her valuable to people whose definitions of service operated in shadows and moral gray areas. And the choices she made in the coming weeks would determine not just her future, but the kind of person she would become. Behind her, she could hear Colonel Morrison briefing his staff on the developing situation. Ahead of her lay her barracks, her gear, and her Barrett rifle, the 32-pound instrument that had somehow become both her salvation and her burden. The weight of excellence, she was learning, was measured not just in pounds and ounces, but in the gravity of the expectations it created and the crushing responsibility of living up to a legend that had taken on a life of its own. The call came at 0347 hours, shattering the pre-dawn silence of forward operating base Sharana with the sharp urgency of combat. Evelyn Thomas rolled out of her bunk with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to transition from sleep to full alertness in seconds. Her hands already reaching for the gear, she kept meticulously arranged beside her rack. Thomas. Martinez, Chun. We've got movement in the hills, and it's not friendly. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried the edge of someone who had seen this particular dance too many times before. Full kit Barrett system, and be ready to move in 10 minutes. Around her, the barracks exploded into controlled chaos as Marines grabbed equipment, checked weapons, and prepared for another day of uncertainty in the Afghan mountains. But for Evelyn, the routine had taken on new dimensions since her encounter with the Pentagon visitors 2 days earlier. Every mission now felt weighted with implications beyond the immediate tactical situation. Every shot potentially scrutinized by people whose agendas remained opaque. She assembled her gear with methodical precision. Body armor, helmet, communications, equipment, medical supplies, ammunition, and finally the Barrett M82 that had become both her signature and her burden. The rifle case felt heavier than usual as she shouldered it, though she knew the weight hadn't changed. Sometimes she reflected. Psychological pressure had its own gravitational pull. Martinez appeared at her elbow, her spotting scope and range-finding equipment, creating a small mountain of technical precision. You good, Thomas? You've been quiet since the colonel's meeting. I'm fine, Evelyn replied automatically, then caught herself. Major Hayes's words echoed in her memory. That's Marine speak for, I'm drowning, but too proud to ask for help. She tried again. Actually, I'm processing some heavy stuff, but I'm good for the mission. Chun joined them as they moved toward the motor pool, his M4 carbine slung across his chest and his usually cheerful demeanor, subdued by the early hour and the weight of impending combat. Any word on what we're walking into? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez met them at their assigned Humvee, a battered vehicle that bore the scars of numerous missions into hostile territory. Intelligence suggests a Taliban reconnaissance element, possibly advanced scouts for a larger force. They've been observed in Grid Square, 457,823, approximately 8 kilometers northeast of our position. He spread a topographical map across the hood of the Humvee, pointing to terrain features with the confidence of someone who had memorized every ridge, valley, and potential ambush site in their area of operations. The good news is that we have excellent visibility from the high ground. The bad news is that they probably know we're coming. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles, their Humvee, a second carrying additional security personnel, and a command vehicle with enhanced communications equipment. As they rolled out of the FOB's protective gates, Evelyn watched the familiar landscape scroll past her window, noting how the pre-dawn darkness transformed even well-known terrain into something alien and potentially threatening. The Rota, generous term for what was essentially a dirt track carved into the mountainside by generations of goats and guerrilla fighters, wound upward through terrain that seemed designed by a malevolent god, specifically to favor defenders over attackers. Every curve offered potential ambush positions, every ridge line could conceal enemy observers, and every valley floor represented a potential kill zone for forces occupying the high ground. Thomas, you ever think about what you want to do when this deployment ends? Chun's question seemed casual, but Evelyn detected something deeper beneath the surface, perhaps the same uncertainty that had been plaguing her own thoughts. I used to, she replied, adjusting her position as the Humvee negotiated a particularly treacherous section of trail. Before everything that happened, I thought maybe I'd do a full 20, retire as a senior NCO, maybe go back to Montana and raise horses or something. And now I'm not sure I get to choose. Martinez looked up from her map study. What do you mean? Evelyn hesitated, unsure how much she should reveal about her meeting with the Pentagon visitors. Military units thrived on trust and shared information, but she instinctively understood that some knowledge carried its own dangers. I mean that being good at something in the military creates expectations. Sometimes those expectations come from places you didn't know existed. The conversation was interrupted by their driver, Lance Corporal Jackson, whose voice carried the tension of someone scanning for threats. Movement, 2 o'clock, approximately 1 kilometer. Through her window, Evelyn could see figures moving along a distant ridgeline, too far away to identify definitively, but their movements carried the purposeful quality of trained fighters, rather than local civilians. Her hands moved instinctively to check her equipment, ensuring that everything was properly secured and immediately accessible. Confirmed hostile movement. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spoke into his radio, updating the convoy's command element. Multiple personnel, advanced positions. Recommend we proceed to designated overwatch position and establish observation. The next hour passed in the careful choreography of military movement through hostile territory. The convoy reached their designated position, a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility across the valley, and the Marines deployed with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, they had established a 360-degree security perimeter, with Evelyn and her team positioned to provide long-range reconnaissance and, if necessary, precision fire support. Through her Barrett scope, Evelyn studied the terrain with the methodical attention to detail that had become second nature. The magnification transformed distant ridges into intimate landscapes, revealing details invisible to the naked eye. The precise positioning of rocks that might conceal fighting positions, the subtle patterns of vegetation that could indicate foot traffic, the almost imperceptible movement that might betray the presence of enemy forces. I count 6, possibly 7 individuals, she reported quietly into her radio. Approximately 1,500 meters, bearing 047 degrees. They appear to be conducting reconnaissance of the valley floor. Martinez peering through her spotting scope confirmed the assessment. Agreed. 6 confirmed, 1 possible. They're good staying in cover, moving with discipline. This isn't some amateur hour operation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez joined them, his own binoculars trained on the suspected enemy positions. Can you get a positive identification on weapons? Evelyn made minute adjustments to her scope, bringing the distant figures into sharper focus. Military training had taught her to distinguish between different types of weapons based on their profiles, and what she saw made her stomach tighten with apprehension. I'm seeing what appears to be at least 2 RPG systems, possibly 3. And at least 1 crew-served weapon looks like a PKM machine gun based on the bipod configuration. She paused, continuing her methodical scan. Staff Sergeant, these guys aren't just conducting reconnaissance. They're positioning for an ambush. The implications were immediately clear to everyone on the team. The valley floor below them was a natural corridor used by coalition supply convoys and patrol routes. If enemy forces could establish effective ambush positions with RPGs and machine guns, they could inflict significant casualties on friendly forces while maintaining excellent escape routes into the surrounding mountains. Base, this is Overwatch. 1. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez spoke into his radio, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering information that would trigger significant military action. We have confirmed hostile activity. Grid square 457,823. Multiple enemy personnel with anti-armor and crew-served weapons, positioning for what appears to be planned ambush operations. The response came back immediately. Overwatch 1, you are cleared to engage targets of opportunity. Repeat, you are cleared to engage. Evelyn felt the familiar tightening in her chest that accompanied the transition from observation to combat operations. Her breathing automatically adjusted to the rhythm she had been taught, her body settling into the shooting position that had become as natural as walking. But something was different this time, a weight of expectation that went beyond the immediate. Tactical situation. Thomas, range to primary target? Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried the professional calm of someone who had guided young Marines through their first combat experiences dozens of times. 1,570 meters to the individual with the RPG system, she reported. Her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. Wind is ... variable, gusting 5 to 8 miles per hour from the southwest. Through her scope, she could see the enemy fighters with startling clarity. The magnification made them seem close enough to touch, transforming abstract tactical problems into intensely personal decisions. The fighter she had designated as her primary target appeared to be in his 20s, his movements efficient and professional. He wore no uniform, nothing to identify him as anything other than another human being trying to survive in a landscape that had been shaped by conflict for generations, but he also carried an RPG-7 rocket-propelled grenade launcher, and his position offered excellent fields of fire against coalition forces using the valley floor. The mathematics of combat were unforgiving. His success would likely mean American casualties, possibly deaths. Her success would mean one less threat to her fellow Marines. Target acquired, she whispered into her radio. Standing by. Send. It, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez replied. The Barrett roared its familiar thunder, the muzzle brake redirecting gases in a controlled explosion of sound and fury. Through her scope, Evelyn watched the bullet's impact, saw the fighter stumble and fall, saw his companions immediately begin moving toward cover with the panicked urgency of people who had suddenly realized they were being observed by forces with the capability to reach across vast distances and touch them with lethal precision. Target down, Martinez confirmed, her spotting scope tracking the results of Evelyn's shot. Remaining personnel are moving to secondary positions. But instead of feeling the grim satisfaction that had accompanied her previous successful engagement, Evelyn found herself studying the fallen fighter through her scope, watching his companions attempt to drag him to safety. The magnification revealed details she wished she couldn't see. The way his body moved with the boneless quality of someone who would never move again under his own power. The growing stain of blood on his clothing. The expression of shock and grief on his companions' faces. Thomas, you've got movement at bearing 062 degrees. Approximately 1,600 meters. Martinez's voice brought her back to the immediate tactical situation. 2 individuals with what appears to be a machine gun. Evelyn shifted her scope to the new target, forcing herself to compartmentalize the emotional weight of her previous shot. Combat operations didn't allow for extended periods of moral reflection. Enemy forces were repositioning, and her fellow Marines were depending on her to neutralize threats before they could be brought to bear against coalition personnel. Second shot was technically more difficult, requiring compensation for a crosswind and an elevated target position. But Evelyn's body seemed to operate on autopilot, making the minute adjustments necessary for precision fire, while her conscious mind struggled to process the reality of what she was doing. The Barrett's recoil hammered into her shoulder, a familiar violence that had become as routine as breathing. Another confirmed kill, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez reported over the radio. Outstanding shooting, Thomas. But as Evelyn watched the remaining enemy personnel scatter into the mountains, abandoning their equipment and their dead in their haste to escape the reach of her rifle, she felt no sense of accomplishment. Instead, she was overwhelmed by a growing realization that her exceptional skill was transforming her into something she wasn't sure she wanted to become. The morning's engagement continued for another 47 minutes, with Evelyn making 3 more long-range shots that neutralized what intelligence would later classify as a significant threat to coalition supply routes. Each shot was technically perfect, demonstrating the kind of precision that would have made her instructors proud. Each shot also added to the growing weight of expectation and reputation that seemed to be reshaping her identity as a Marine and as a person. By the time the team returned to Forward Operating Base Sharana, Evelyn Thomas had established herself as the most effective long-range precision shooter in the theater of operations. She had also begun to understand that exceptional competence in the art of war came with consequences that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. The briefing session lasted 2 hours, with intelligence officers extracting every detail of the engagement for analysis and future planning. The weapons and equipment abandoned by the enemy forces were catalogued. The positions they had been occupying were marked for future surveillance, and the implications of their planned ambush were analyzed for patterns that might predict future enemy operations. But what struck Evelyn most profoundly during the debriefing wasn't the tactical discussion or the intelligence analysis, it was the way the officers spoke about her shooting. They discussed her engagement effectiveness and target neutralization rates with the same clinical detachment they might use to analyze the performance of a new weapon system. She had become, in their minds, less a person than a precision instrument, valuable primarily for her ability to project lethal force across extreme distances. Private Thomas, your performance today was exceptional, Major Collins, the battalion operations officer, said as the formal debriefing concluded. 5 confirmed kills at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters under combat conditions with 0 friendly casualties. That's the kind of capability that wins wars. The praise felt like lead weights settling in her stomach. 5 confirmed kills. 5 human beings who had awakened that morning with plans and hopes and fears, who were now cooling. Corpses scattered across an Afghan mountainside. The military's clinical language couldn't disguise the fundamental reality of what she had done, and what she was becoming increasingly efficient at doing. After the debriefing, Evelyn found herself walking aimlessly around the forward operating base, her feet carrying her past the motor pool, the communications bunker, the medical facility where wounded Marines received treatment before being evacuated to larger hospitals. The base buzzed with activity convoys preparing for patrol, aircraft arriving with supplies and personnel, the endless cycle of military operations that continued, regardless of individual struggles with conscience and consequence. She eventually found herself at the base's small chapel, a prefabricated building that served multiple faiths and provided a space for quiet reflection. The chaplain, Captain Rodriguez, no relation to her staff sergeant, was a soft-spoken man in his 40s who had the gift of making people feel heard without judgment. "Mind if I sit?" Evelyn asked, settling onto one of the folding chairs that constituted the chapel's congregation seating. Of course, Marine. Rough day? Evelyn considered the question, trying to find words adequate to describe the growing weight of her situation. I'm good at my job, Chaplain. Maybe too good. That's an interesting problem to have. Most people struggle with being inadequate at their responsibilities. Most people's jobs don't involve killing other human beings with surgical precision from distances that make them feel like playing God. Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. You're talking about the engagement this morning. Word travels fast on a base this size, and your reputation is becoming something of a legend among the enlisted personnel. That's part of the problem. I signed up to be a Marine, to serve my country and protect my fellow service members. But I'm starting to feel like I'm being turned into something else, a weapon that happens to have a human being attached to it. The chaplain was quiet for several minutes, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had counseled many young service members through similar struggles. Evelyn, may I call you Evelyn? She nodded. You're facing one of the oldest moral challenges in military service, the tension between individual conscience and collective responsibility. Your skills save American lives, but they also require you to take lives that might have been lived differently under different circumstances. How do I reconcile that? How do I serve my country and my fellow Marines without losing my soul in the process? I wish I had an easy answer. But I think the fact that you're asking the question is important. The Marines who worry me are the ones who stop feeling the weight of what they do. Your conscience isn't a weakness, Evelyn. It's what keeps you human in situations that can easily dehumanize everyone involved. Their conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who approached the chapel with the purposeful stride of someone carrying urgent information. Thomas, I've been looking for you. Colonel Morrison wants to see you again. Evelyn's stomach tightened with apprehension. Another meeting with the colonel likely meant another encounter with the Pentagon visitors, another attempt to redirect her career toward shadows and moral ambiguity she wasn't sure she was prepared to navigate. Did he say what about, Staff Sergeant? Negative, but he mentioned that your performance today had attracted additional attention from higher headquarters. That could be good news, or... He shrugged, the gesture conveying all the uncertainty that came with military life. The walk to the command bunker felt longer than usual, each step carrying her further from the simple certainties she had embraced when she first enlisted. The Marines had initially seemed like a straightforward proposition: serve your country, protect your fellow service members, uphold the values that made America worth defending. But nothing about her current situation felt straightforward. Colonel Morrison was alone this time, studying a stack of reports that covered his desk like fallen leaves. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable but not unkind. Thomas, take a seat. We need to discuss your future. She settled into the same folding chair she had occupied during her previous visit, noting that it still felt uncomfortable and slightly unsteady. Sir, if this is about the Pentagon visitors, it's not. Well, not directly. Colonel Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with the analytical attention of someone trying to solve a complex problem. Your performance today, combined with your previous engagement 3 weeks ago, has created a situation that extends beyond normal military personnel management. I don't understand, sir. Thomas, in my 26 years of military service, I've never encountered a Marine with your particular combination of technical skill and tactical effectiveness. The longest confirmed kills in military history, made by someone who's been in the Corps for less than 8 months. That kind of capability doesn't go unnoticed, especially in today's operational environment. Colonel Morrison pulled a folder from beneath his stack of reports and opened it to reveal what appeared to be official correspondence, bearing impressive letterheads and multiple signatures. I've received inquiries from the Commandant's office, from Special Operations Command, from organizations whose existence I'm not authorized to acknowledge. Everyone wants to know about the 18-year-old Marine who can reach across mountains and touch enemies with supernatural precision. Evelyn felt as if the walls of the bunker were closing in around her. "Sir, I just want to serve my country and complete my enlistment with honor. I don't want to be anyone's secret weapon." Unfortunately, Thomas, what we want and what circumstances require of us aren't always the same thing. The colonel's voice carried a note of sympathy, but also the firm resolve of someone who had learned to navigate competing pressures and conflicting demands. Your skills represent a significant national security asset. The question isn't whether you'll be asked to use those skills in unusual ways. The question is whether you'll have any say in how and when they're employed. The conversation was interrupted by a sharp knock on the bunker door. A young Marine appeared, carrying a message folder marked with the red stripe that indicated urgent communications from higher headquarters. "Sir, priority message from division. They're requesting immediate confirmation of today's engagement results and—" The Marine glanced uncertainly at Evelyn. "And detailed personnel files for Private Thomas." Colonel Morrison accepted the folder and quickly scanned its contents, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Thomas, it appears your reputation has reached levels of command I hadn't anticipated. Division wants you transferred to their headquarters for enhanced utilization of specialized capabilities." Creating this compelling military story required extensive research and careful attention to detail. If you're enjoying Evelyn's journey, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories. What does that mean, sir? It means they want to pull you out of normal infantry operations and assign you to specialized missions that would take better advantage of your long-range precision capabilities. It means you'd be working directly for people whose mission requirements might not align with traditional Marine Corps' values. Evelyn stared at the message folder as if it were a venomous snake. Everything she had hoped to avoid was crystallizing into official orders that would reshape her military career and possibly her life. The 18-year-old farm girl from Montana was disappearing, replaced by something she wasn't sure she wanted to become. "Do I have any choice in this, sir?" Colonel Morrison's smile was grim, but not without warmth. "You always have choices, Thomas. But some choices carry consequences that extend far beyond personal preference. The question you need to ask yourself is whether you're willing to accept those consequences." Outside the bunker, the sounds of military life continued: helicopters arriving and departing, vehicles moving supplies and personnel, the endless cycle of operations that sustained American forces in a hostile environment. But inside the bunker, Evelyn Thomas faced a decision that would determine not just her military career, but the fundamental direction of her adult life. The weight of excellence she was learning was measured not just in the physical burden of equipment and expectations, but in the moral weight of the choices it forced upon her. And the heaviest burden of all might be the realization that her exceptional skills had transformed her from a person making choices into a weapon whose deployment would be determined by forces beyond her control. The helicopter that arrived to extract Evelyn Thomas from Forward Operating Base Sharana wasn't the standard transport aircraft she had expected. Instead, it was a sleek black machine that bore no visible military markings, crewed by pilots whose flight suits displayed no name tags or unit patches. As she climbed aboard with her gear, Evelyn realized she was crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. The flight to division headquarters normally took 47 minutes across terrain that had been shaped by decades of conflict. But this helicopter took a different route, flying at altitudes and speeds that suggested its crew operated under different rules than standard military aviation. Through her window, Evelyn watched Afghanistan scroll past beneath her, a landscape of impossible beauty scarred by the evidence of human violence. She wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez, a woman in her mid-30s whose bearing suggested extensive combat experience. Unlike the Pentagon visitors who had first approached Evelyn, Master Sergeant Vasquez wore standard military utilities, though her equipment and weapons were clearly of higher quality than standard issue. First time flying with special operations. Aviation? Vasquez asked, her voice pitched to carry over the helicopter's engine noise. I didn't know that's what this was, Evelyn replied. There's a lot you don't know yet. That's why I'm here to help you understand what you've gotten yourself into, and what your options actually are. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression serious but not unkind. Thomas, what do you know about the Marine Corps' Force Reconnaissance? Units? Basic information from training. Elite reconnaissance and direct action capabilities, highly selective recruitment, advanced training programs. That's the sanitized version. The reality is more complex. Vasquez gestured toward the helicopter's sophisticated equipment. Force Recon operates in the gray areas between conventional military operations and activities that don't officially exist. We go places other Marines can't go, do things other Marines aren't trained to do, and deal with problems that require solutions outside normal military doctrine. Evelyn felt a familiar tightening in her chest. And you think I'd be a good fit for that kind of work? I think you've already demonstrated capabilities that Force Recon has been looking for. The question is whether you understand what accepting that kind of assignment would mean for your life and your career. The helicopter began its descent toward what appeared to be a military installation unlike any Evelyn had previously seen. Instead of the sprawling, semi-permanent structures typical of major bases, this facility looked more like a corporate campus that happened to be surrounded by serious security measures. The landing pad was positioned to provide immediate access to buildings that suggested high-level planning and coordination activities. Where are we? Evelyn asked as the helicopter settled onto the landing pad with mechanical precision. Officially? A joint training facility for special operations personnel. Unofficially? The place where people like you decide what kind of Marine they want to become. The debriefing facility was unlike anything in Evelyn's previous military experience. Instead of the utilitarian brutality of standard military architecture, the conference room featured comfortable furniture, advanced audiovisual equipment, and a view of mountains that reminded her uncomfortably of home. Waiting for her was a group of individuals whose mixed military and civilian attire suggested the kind of interagency cooperation that existed in organizational gray areas. Private First Class Thomas, welcome. The speaker was Colonel Sarah Patterson, a woman whose uniform bore the insignia of someone who had commanded at multiple levels and whose bearing suggested extensive combat experience. I'm sure you have questions about why you're here and what we expect from you. Yes, ma'am, I do. Good. Questions are healthy. They suggest you're thinking critically about your situation rather than simply accepting whatever you're told. Colonel Chun gestured to the other individuals in the room. These representatives come from various organizations that have an interest in your particular capabilities. Today, we're going to be completely honest with you about what those capabilities mean and what opportunities they create. A man in his 40s wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with obvious military bearing, stepped forward. Thomas, I'm Mr. Johnson from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Let me start with some uncomfortable truths about your situation. He activated a large display screen that showed a detailed analysis of Evelyn's shooting performance, complete with ballistic calculations, environmental factors, and comparative data from other military snipers. The level of detail was both impressive and unsettling. Your shot 3 weeks ago wasn't just remarkable for its distance and accuracy. It was remarkable because it demonstrated a combination of technical skill, tactical judgment, and psychological composure that we rarely see in personnel with your level of experience. The screen changed to show a global map marked with various locations. There are currently 17 active conflict zones where personnel with your capabilities could provide significant tactical advantages to American forces and allied governments. Evelyn studied the map, noting locations in Africa, Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe, and South America. Are you talking about combat deployments? We're talking about missions that would utilize your skills in ways that support American national security interests. Some of those missions would involve traditional military operations. Others would involve activities that require more discretion. Master Sergeant Vasquez spoke up from her position near the window. Thomas, they're trying to recruit you for assassination missions. They want to turn you into a sniper who eliminates specific targets on orders from people whose names you'll never know, in support of policies you'll never be briefed on. The blunt statement created an uncomfortable silence in the room. Mr. Johnson's expression hardened, while Colonel Chun maintained her professional demeanor with visible effort. That's an oversimplification, Mr. Johnson said finally, is it? Vasquez turned to face Evelyn directly. Thomas, I've spent 12 years in Force Recon and Special Operations. I've done things I can't talk about in places I can't name, and I've seen what happens to people who get pulled into the kind of work these people are describing. Some of them adapt well, others don't come back the same. A woman wearing the uniform of an Army colonel entered the conversation. Sergeant Vasquez, you're presenting an unnecessarily negative perspective. Private Thomas, what we're offering is an opportunity to serve your country at the highest levels, to use your exceptional skills in ways that could prevent conflicts rather than simply participate in them. By killing people, Evelyn said quietly. By eliminating threats to American security and allied governments before those threats can mature into larger conflicts that would cost thousands of American lives. The moral calculations were clear. But something felt different this time. Thinking about the fighter in the white head wrap, about the way he had looked down at his chest with such surprise. And how do you decide who constitutes a threat worthy of elimination? That's above your clearance level, Mr. Johnson replied. Your responsibility would be to execute missions based on intelligence and authorization from appropriate authorities. The strategic decision-making would be handled by people with access to information and perspectives that operational personnel don't have. Master Sergeant Vasquez laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. In other words, you'd be a trigger puller who kills people based on decisions made by bureaucrats you'll never meet, using intelligence you'll never see, in support of policies you'll never understand. Colonel Chun raised her hand, stopping the increasingly heated exchange. Thomas, let me offer a different perspective. Every military specialist faces questions about how their skills are employed and by whom. The difference with your situation is that your capabilities are rare enough to create unusual opportunities and unusual responsibilities. She activated a different display that showed personnel files and organizational charts. Currently, there are fewer than 23 active military snipers worldwide who have demonstrated the ability to make consistent precision shots at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters under combat conditions. You're not just the youngest, you're also potentially the most naturally gifted. The screen changed to show a series of photographs, military installations, urban environments, remote locations that suggested covert operations. The reality of modern warfare is that traditional military conflicts represent only a fraction of the threats facing American security. There are terrorists who can't be reached by conventional forces, hostile government officials who sponsor attacks against American interests, criminal organizations whose activities threaten regional stability. And you want me to kill them? Evelyn said. We want you to consider whether you're willing to accept the responsibility that comes with your capabilities. The room fell silent as Evelyn processed the implications of what she was being offered. The straightforward moral universe she had embraced when she enlisted serve your country, protect your fellow Americans, defend democracy against its enemies, had dissolved into something far more complex and ambiguous. What if I say no? She asked finally. Mr. Johnson's smile was thin, but not entirely unsympathetic. You finish your current enlistment with a standard infantry unit, probably receive commendations for your exceptional service, and transition to civilian life with the knowledge that you possessed capabilities that could have been used to serve your country in ways that went far beyond normal military service. And if I say yes, Colonel Chun took over the response. You'd receive advanced training in specialized reconnaissance and direct action techniques, work with elite units on high-priority missions, and serve your country in ways that most Americans will never know about or appreciate. Master Sergeant Vasquez moved to stand beside Evelyn's chair. Thomas, there's a third option they haven't mentioned. You could request assignment to Force Reconnaissance, where you'd work with elite Marine units on missions that push the boundaries of conventional military operations without crossing into the moral gray areas that these people specialize in. The suggestion clearly wasn't what Mr. Johnson had hoped to hear. Sergeant Vasquez, Force Recon, is an excellent organization, but it doesn't fully utilize capabilities like Private Thomas's. We're offering opportunities for service at a strategic level that would turn an 18-year-old Marine into an assassin operating under the control of intelligence agencies whose missions and methods she'd never be authorized to understand. Vasquez's voice carried the authority of someone who had seen the consequences of such decisions. Thomas, I've worked with people who made that choice. Some of them handled it well. Others ended up broken in ways that never fully heal. Evelyn looked around the room at the faces watching her military officers, intelligence operatives, and specialists whose agenda she could only guess at. Each of them represented different visions of what her life could become, different ways of utilizing the skills that had somehow transformed her from a farm girl into a strategic asset. How long do I have to decide? Take your time, Colonel, Chun said, but understand that opportunities like this don't remain open indefinitely. And understand that your capabilities represent a resource that your country needs, regardless of your personal preferences about how that resource is employed. The weight of the decision pressed down on Evelyn like a physical force. In the space of 6 weeks, she had gone from being an anonymous infantry Marine to being courted by organizations whose existence operated in shadows and moral ambiguities. Her exceptional skill had created opportunities she had never imagined and responsibilities she wasn't sure she was prepared to accept. But as she sat in that conference room, surrounded by people who viewed her primarily as a collection of capabilities to be deployed in support of objectives she might never fully understand, Evelyn Thomas began to realize that the most important decision she faced wasn't whether to accept their offers. The most important decision was whether she could find a way to serve her country and her fellow Marines without losing herself in the process. 3 days after her meeting at the Special Operations Facility, Evelyn Thomas stood once again in Colonel Morrison's command bunker at Forward Operating Base Sharana. But this time, she wasn't the uncertain 18-year-old who had been summoned to meet Pentagon visitors. This time, she carried with her the weight of knowledge about what her exceptional skills meant and what opportunities they had created. So, Colonel Morrison said, settling back in his chair with a cup of coffee that steamed in the afternoon heat, "What did you decide?" Evelyn had rehearsed this moment during her flight back to the FOB, practicing different ways to explain a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "Sir, I want to stay with my unit and complete my deployment as a regular Marine. After that, I want to request an assignment to Force Reconnaissance." Colonel Morrison nodded slowly, as if her response confirmed something he had already suspected. "And the other opportunities? The ones that would have utilized your skills at what they called strategic levels?" "I don't want to be anyone's secret weapon, sir. I joined the Marines to serve my country and protect my fellow service members. I can do that with Force Recon without becoming something I'm not sure I want to be." The colonel's smile was the first genuinely pleased expression Evelyn had seen from him since their association began. "Outstanding, Thomas. That takes moral courage that goes beyond anything you've demonstrated with a rifle. Their conversation was interrupted by the familiar sound of incoming mortar rounds, the distinctive whistle that every Marine learned to recognize and fear. The first explosion hit somewhere near the motor pool, close enough to rattle the bunker's reinforced walls and send dust cascading from the ceiling. Incoming. The warning echoed across the base's communication system as Marines scrambled for cover and defensive positions. All personnel, take cover. Incoming indirect fire. Colonel Morrison was already moving toward his communications equipment, his personal concerns forgotten in the face of immediate tactical requirements. "Get me a damage assessment and location of origin," he barked into his radio. "And somebody, find out how many casualties we have." Evelyn felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that accompanied combat situations, her body automatically transitioning into the heightened awareness that had become second nature during her months in Afghanistan. Through the bunker's reinforced windows, she could see Marines running toward defensive positions, their movements displaying the practiced efficiency of personnel who had faced indirect fire attacks before. "Sir, request permission to report." "To my unit," she said. "Granted, and Thomas, be careful. Something tells me this isn't a random harassment attack." The run from the command bunker to her unit's position took Evelyn through a FOB that had transformed from a place of relative safety into an active combat zone. More mortar rounds impacted as she moved, their explosions sending up geysers of dirt and debris that rained down on anyone caught in the open. She could see Marines taking cover behind concrete barriers, returning fire toward suspected enemy positions in the surrounding hills. She found Staff Sergeant Rodriguez coordinating defensive fires from behind a reinforced fighting position, his radio crackling with reports from observation posts and patrol elements scattered throughout their area of operations. "Thomas, where the hell have you been?" His relief was evident despite his professional tone. "We've got a complex attack developing mortar, small arms, and what sounds like at least one RPG team." Martinez appeared at her elbow, her spotting scope and range-finding equipment ready for immediate deployment. "They're coordinating from multiple positions," she reported. "This isn't some amateur hour harassment. These guys know what they're doing." Chun joined them, his M4 carbine locked and loaded, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced by the focused intensity that combat demanded. "Word is they're trying to overrun the south perimeter. If they breach the wire, we're going to have enemy forces inside the base." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez made a decision that would later be analyzed and debated in military colleges. "Thomas, get your Barrett. We need long-range fires to disrupt their coordination and break up their attack before they can mass sufficient forces to breach our defenses." The Barrett felt different in Evelyn's hands as she carried it toward their designated fighting position, not heavier, but somehow more significant. This wasn't a precision engagement against distant targets. This was a direct defense of her home base, protection of Marines she had lived and served with for months. The moral calculations were simpler here, clearer, more aligned with the straightforward values that had led her to enlist. From their elevated position, she could see muzzle flashes scattered across the hillsides that surrounded the FOB, dozens of enemy fighters coordinating what appeared to be a deliberate attempt to overrun American positions. Through her scope, the magnification transformed distant threats into immediate tactical problems that demanded precise solutions. "I count at least 15 muzzle flashes, multiple positions," she reported to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. "Ranges from 800 to 1800 meters. They're using the terrain to mask their movement between positions. Can you disrupt their fire coordination?" Evelyn studied the enemy positions through her scope, noting the patterns of fire and movement that suggested command and control elements directing the overall attack. Military training had taught her to identify priority targets: leaders, crew-served weapons, communications equipment whose elimination would have disproportionate effects on enemy capabilities. "I can see what appears to be a command element at approximately 1500 meters. Bearing 270 degrees, they're coordinating fires from multiple subordinate positions. Take them out. The shot that followed would later be described in after-action reports as tactically decisive. Evelyn's bullet traveled across nearly a mile of contested terrain to strike the enemy commander at the precise moment he was directing mortar fires against the FOB's medical facility. His death created immediate disruption in the enemy's coordination, with subordinate elements losing their synchronized timing and beginning to fire independently rather than as part of a coordinated assault. But Evelyn didn't stop with a single shot. Over the next 37 minutes, she methodically engaged targets across the enemy's attack formation, using her exceptional range and accuracy to eliminate key personnel and disrupt equipment that posed the greatest threats to friendly forces. Each shot was precisely calculated, each target carefully selected for maximum tactical effect. Outstanding shooting, Thomas. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's voice carried genuine admiration as he watched enemy forces begin to withdraw from their attack positions. You just broke up a coordinated assault that could have overrun our south perimeter. Martinez, tracking targets through her spotting scope, provided running commentary on the effectiveness of Evelyn's engagement. 7 confirmed kills, 3 probable, and at least 4 crew-served weapons knocked out of action. The remaining forces are withdrawing to secondary positions. But as the immediate crisis passed and the enemy attack dissolved into scattered harassment fires, Evelyn found herself processing what had just happened with a clarity that had been absent during her previous combat engagements. This time, there was no moral ambiguity, no question about the righteousness of her actions. She had defended her home base, protected her fellow Marines, and used her exceptional skills in direct support of values she could embrace without reservation. Staff Sergeant, she said as they watched the last enemy muzzle flashes disappear into the mountainous terrain, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to serve. Rodriguez looked at her with an expression that combined professional respect with something approaching paternal pride. Thomas, what you did today saved American lives. Maybe dozens of them. That's what being a Marine is about, using your skills to protect your brothers and sisters in arms. The after-action review lasted 3 hours with intelligence officers, medical personnel, and command staff analyzing every aspect of the enemy attack and the coalition response. Evelyn's role in disrupting the assault was thoroughly documented, with her shooting described as tactically decisive and strategically significant. But what impressed the reviewing officers wasn't just her technical competence, it was her judgment in target selection and her ability to maintain effective fires under pressure while friendly forces maneuvered around her position. She had demonstrated not just exceptional marksmanship, but the kind of tactical awareness that suggested potential for leadership responsibilities. Thomas, Colonel Morrison said as the formal review concluded, I forwarded your request for force reconnaissance training to higher headquarters. Based on today's performance, I'm confident it will be approved. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Force recon training is going to challenge you in ways that go far beyond marksmanship. They're going to test your leadership potential, your ability to operate independently, and your judgment under conditions where there's no clear guidance from higher authority. As Evelyn walked back to her barracks that evening, she reflected on the events that had shaped her military career over the past 2 months. The shot that had made her famous had also created opportunities and pressures she had never anticipated. The offers from intelligence agencies had forced her to confront questions about service and sacrifice that went far beyond anything covered in basic training. But the day's combat had clarified something essential about her identity as a Marine and as a person. She wasn't interested in being a secret weapon deployed by people whose agendas she would never understand. She wasn't interested in becoming an assassin who eliminated targets based on intelligence she would never see. What she wanted was to serve her country and protect her fellow Marines using skills that had somehow become exceptional in support of values she could embrace without moral compromise. Force reconnaissance would give her the opportunity to do exactly that, to push the boundaries of conventional military service without crossing into moral gray areas that would transform her into something she didn't want to become. The next morning brought new challenges and new opportunities. Division headquarters confirmed her acceptance for force reconnaissance training, scheduled to begin immediately after her deployment to Afghanistan concluded. The Pentagon visitors sent a formal letter expressing their disappointment with her decision, but acknowledging their respect for her choice to pursue conventional military service. And Master Sergeant Vasquez arrived with a message that would shape the next phase of Evelyn's career. Thomas, Force Recon wants you to understand that they're not just accepting you for training. They're building a program around your capabilities. You're going to become the prototype for a new kind of Marine, one who combines extreme-range precision shooting with advanced reconnaissance and direct action capabilities. The weight of that responsibility felt different from the pressures she had experienced during her encounters with intelligence agencies. This was weight she could carry with pride, expectation she could meet without compromising her fundamental values. This was the kind of service she had enlisted to provide. As her deployment in Afghanistan moved toward its conclusion, Evelyn Thomas had become something she had never expected to become, a Marine whose exceptional skills had created new possibilities for military service while staying true to the values that had led her to enlist. She had found a way to be extraordinary without losing herself in the process. The legend that had begun with a single impossible shot had evolved into something more important than fame or reputation. It had become a demonstration that exceptional competence could be employed in service of clear moral principles, that deadly skills could be used to protect rather than simply destroy, and that an 18-year-old farm girl from Montana could serve her country at the highest levels without sacrificing her fundamental humanity. 2 years later, the Marine Corps' base Quantico rifle range stretched before them like a cathedral of precision, its bermed firing lines and distant targets testimony to decades of marksmanship excellence. But today, something unprecedented was taking place. Staff Sergeant Evelyn Thomas, promoted twice since her return from Afghanistan, stood behind a line of 12 Marine recruits, each holding a Barrett M82 rifle with the reverent caution of someone handling a sacred relic. The fundamentals never change, she told them, her voice carrying across the range with the authority of someone who had proven these principles under conditions where mistakes meant death. Breathing, sight picture, trigger control, follow through. Everything else is just environmental variables. At 20 years old, Evelyn had become the youngest staff sergeant in force reconnaissance history, her rapid promotion justified by combat performance that had redefined military understanding of extreme-range precision shooting. But more importantly, she had become the cornerstone of a new training program designed to develop Marines capable of providing precision fire support at distances previously considered impossible. Among the recruits learning from her was Private Jennifer Hayes, no relation to her former spotter, a 19-year-old from Arizona, whose preliminary testing had suggested exceptional potential for long-range precision shooting. Like Evelyn 2 years earlier, she combined natural ability with the kind of focused determination that could be developed into extraordinary competence. Staff Sergeant Private Martinez asked, "How do you deal with the psychological pressure of knowing that people are counting on you to make impossible shots?" Evelyn considered the question, remembering her own struggles with the weight of expectation and the moral complexity of wielding lethal skills with supernatural precision. You focus on why you're taking the shot, not the mechanics of taking it. Every round you fire is in service of protecting Marines who can't protect themselves. That's what makes the pressure manageable. The day's training concluded with live-fire exercises at ranges extending out to 2,000 meters, pushing the recruits to the edge of what was technically possible with their equipment and training. Evelyn watched each shooter with the analytical, Attention to detail that had become second nature, noting the subtle indicators that separated natural marksmen from Marines who would need additional development. After the range cleared, she found herself walking the familiar paths of Quantico with Master Sergeant Vasquez, who had become both mentor and advocate during Evelyn's transition from combat Marine to instructor and program developer. "How are they progressing?" Vasquez asked, her question referring to the broader program rather than the day's specific. "Training, better than expected. We've identified 6 recruits with the potential to achieve consistent precision at extreme ranges, and another dozen who could provide effective support at more conventional distances." Evelyn paused to watch a formation of new recruits marching past, their movements displaying the awkward precision of personnel still learning to function as Marines. The bigger challenge isn't the shooting, it's preparing them for the psychological weight that comes with these capabilities. "You mean the weight you carried when you were 18 and everyone wanted to turn you into their personal weapon?" "Exactly. These Marines need to understand that exceptional skills create exceptional opportunities, but they also create exceptional pressures. They need to be prepared to make choices about how those skills are employed and by whom." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Chun, now serving as the commanding officer of the Marine Corps' Advanced Reconnaissance and Precision Shooting Program. At 42, she had become one of the Corps' most respected advocates for innovative training methodologies and unconventional approaches to military challenges. "Thomas, walk with me," she said, falling into step beside them as they continued across the base. "I've got news about your program's expansion, and I think you're going to find it interesting." The news was indeed significant. The Advanced Reconnaissance and Precision Shooting Program had been selected for expansion to all Marine divisions, with Evelyn's training methodologies serving as the foundation for a new military occupational specialty that would revolutionize how the Corps approached long-range precision operations. "We're talking about fundamentally changing how the Marine Corps thinks about precision marksmanship," Colonel Chun explained as they walked toward the program's headquarters building. "Your techniques, your training protocols, your approach to developing both technical skills and psychological resilience, all of it, is being adopted as the new standard for extreme-range precision shooting." Evelyn felt a familiar tightening in her chest, but this time it wasn't anxiety about her own performance. It was the weight of responsibility that came with knowing her methods would shape how future Marines were trained, how they would be employed in combat, and ultimately how they would live with the consequences of their exceptional capabilities. "Ma'am, that's a significant responsibility." "It is. But it's also an opportunity to ensure that Marines with your capabilities receive the kind of preparation and support that you had to develop on your own." Colonel Chun stopped walking and turned to face Evelyn directly. "Thomas, you've proven that it's possible to be extraordinarily competent at lethal skills while maintaining clear moral principles. That's exactly what the Corps needs as we develop this new capability." 6 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered through official Marine Corps channels but bearing a return address that made Evelyn's hands tremble as she opened it. It was from Mrs. Rebecca Stanton of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and it began with words that would haunt and honor Evelyn for the rest of her life. "Dear Staff Sergeant Thomas, you don't know me, but you saved my son's life." The letter continued with details that military censors had somehow allowed to pass through. Mrs. Stanton's son, Lance Corporal David Stanton, had been part of Bravo Company during the engagement where Evelyn had made her first legendary shot. The mortar position she had eliminated had been preparing to fire on his unit's position when her bullet found its target across 2 miles of Afghan mountain terrain. "David wrote to me about what happened that day," the letter continued. "He said an 18-year-old Marine with a rifle that weighed more than she did had reached across the mountains and saved 42 American lives with a single shot. He said it was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever witnessed." Evelyn Read the letter 3 times before the full weight of its implications settled into her consciousness. Her shot hadn't been an abstract tactical success or a demonstration of exceptional marksmanship. Had been the difference between 42 families receiving their sons and daughters alive versus receiving folded flags and military escorts bearing news that would shatter their worlds forever. The letter concluded with an invitation that surprised her. David is getting married next month, and he specifically asked me to invite you to the wedding. He says he wants to introduce the woman who made his future possible to the woman who gave him that future. If you can make it to Cedar Rapids, we would be honored to have you as our guest. 3 years later, Staff Sergeant Evelyn Thomas stood at the altar of St. Mark's Lutheran Church in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, serving as maid of honor for David Stanton's wedding to his longtime girlfriend, Sarah Williams, no relation to her former teammate. The church was filled with Marines, both active duty and veteran, creating an atmosphere that combined military precision with civilian celebration. But what struck Evelyn most profoundly wasn't the military presence or the formal ceremony. It was the realization that her single shot 3 years earlier had protected not just 42 Marines, but the entire network of relationships and possibilities that flowed from their survival. David's wedding was possible because he had lived. The children he would have with Sarah would exist because Evelyn had been able to reach across 2 miles of hostile terrain and eliminate a threat with surgical precision. During the reception, she found herself surrounded by Marines whose lives had been touched, directly or indirectly, by her shooting. Some had been part of Bravo Company that day. Others had served in units whose operations had been made possible by the tactical success of her engagement. All of them seemed to understand that they were in the presence of someone whose skills had redefined what was possible in modern military operations. "Thomas, you've got to hear this," Chun, her former teammate, now a sergeant himself, approached with a group of Marines she didn't recognize. "These guys are from 3rd Battalion, 2nd Marines. Tell her what you told me about the training program." One of the Marines, a young lance corporal who couldn't have been more than 19, stepped forward with the nervous energy of someone meeting a legend. "Staff Sergeant, I just graduated from the Advanced Precision Shooting Program. They've got your picture in the classroom, and they use your Afghanistan engagement as the foundational case study for extreme-range precision shooting." Another Marine joined the conversation. "Ma'am, they've named the final training exercise after you. The Thomas Standard, a 2,000-meter shot under combat conditions with wind and environmental variables. Nobody graduates without meeting it." Evelyn felt simultaneously honored and overwhelmed by the realization that her name had become synonymous with a level of military excellence that was now being used to train future generations of Marine snipers. The 18-year-old farm girl who had made an impossible shot to save her fellow Marines had evolved into an institutional standard that would shape military training for decades to come. 5 years later, Gunnery Sergeant Evelyn Thomas stood in the Pentagon briefing room, her dress blue uniform bearing ribbons and decorations that told the story of 5 years of exceptional military service. Across from her sat General Patricia Morrison, Colonel Morrison's wife, now serving as the Marine Corps' Deputy Commandant for Combat Development and Integration. "Gunny Thomas, your program has exceeded every metric we established for success," General Morrison said, reviewing performance data displayed on multiple screens around the conference room. "We now have force reconnaissance teams capable of providing precision fire support at ranges that were considered impossible just 5 years ago." The statistics were impressive. Over 300 Marines trained to her standards, with collective performance in combat operations that had redefined military understanding of what was tactically possible with precision shooting. But more importantly, the program had maintained the ethical standards that Evelyn had insisted upon from its inception. Every graduate understood that exceptional skills came with exceptional responsibilities to use those skills in service of clear moral principles. Ma'am, I've been thinking about the next phase of the program's development, Evelyn said. We've proven that we can train Marines to achieve these capabilities. Now I think we need to focus on developing leaders who can employ these capabilities responsibly. What do you have in mind? A leadership track that combines advanced tactical training with strategic education. Marines who can not only make impossible shots, but who understand the broader implications of when and how those capabilities should be employed. General Morrison smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose investment in innovative thinking had produced exactly the results she had hoped for. Gunny, you're describing yourself out of a job. If we develop Marines who can think strategically about precision shooting employment, we won't need you to oversee every aspect of the program. That's exactly the point, ma'am. The goal was never to create a program dependent on my personal involvement. The goal was to create institutional capabilities that would outlast any individual contributor. 8 years later, the ceremony took place at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, under a California sky that reminded Evelyn of the endless horizon she had grown up with in Montana. At 26, now holding the rank of Master Sergeant, she stood before an assembly that included Marines, military leadership, and family members who had traveled from across the country to witness an event that had been 8 years in the making. Master Sergeant Evelyn Thomas, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, began, his voice carrying across the assembled formation with parade ground authority, for exceptional leadership in the development of advanced military capabilities for distinguished service in combat operations, and for establishing training standards that have enhanced the effectiveness of Marine Corps operations worldwide. You are hereby awarded the Navy Cross. The medal was placed around her neck by hands that had guided the Marine Corps through some of its most challenging periods in modern history. But as Evelyn felt the weight of the decoration settle against her chest, she wasn't thinking about personal recognition or military honors. She was thinking about Lance Corporal David Stanton, now a successful civilian engineer with 2 children, who existed because she had been able to make an impossible shot under impossible conditions. She was thinking about the 300 Marines who had graduated from her training program, each carrying forward the technical skills and ethical standards she had fought to establish. She was thinking about her grandfather's Bronze Star and her mother's tears and the 32-pound Barrett rifle that had somehow carried her from a farm in Montana to the highest levels of military recognition. 10 years later, the book signing at the Barnes & Noble in Billings, Montana, drew a crowd that surprised everyone, including Evelyn herself. The Weight of Excellence, a Marine's journey from farm girl to legend, had spent 6 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, but more importantly, it had started conversations about military service, personal responsibility, and the moral weight that came with exceptional capabilities. Now retired from active duty as a Master Sergeant, Evelyn had returned to Montana to establish a private training facility for law enforcement and military personnel. But she had also become something she had never expected, a voice for veterans struggling with the psychological weight of combat service, particularly those whose skills had made them valuable in ways that challenged their fundamental values. The question I get asked most frequently, she told the audience, is whether I ever regret making that first shot, whether I wish I had never demonstrated the capabilities that changed my life so dramatically. She paused, looking out at faces that included active duty Marines, veterans, family members, and civilians whose only exposure to military service came through books and documentaries. The answer is complicated. I don't regret saving 42 American lives. I don't regret serving my country with honor and distinction. I don't regret establishing training programs that have made future Marines more effective and more ethically grounded. Another pause, this one longer and more thoughtful. But I do think about the weight that comes with being exceptionally good at something that involves life and death decisions. And I think about the responsibility we all have to Ensure that extraordinary capabilities are employed in service of values worth defending. After the signing concluded, Evelyn drove her pickup truck through the Montana countryside that had shaped her childhood, past the farmhouse where her grandfather had taught her to shoot, past the river where she had learned to swim, past the endless horizons that had first made her dream of seeing the world beyond the boundaries of her rural upbringing. She stopped at the small cemetery where Thomas Eugene Thomas lay buried beneath a headstone that bore the Marine Corps' emblem and the dates of a life that had spanned 2 wars and the Great Depression. Beside his grave was a newer marker, her grandmother, who had passed away during Evelyn's second deployment, taking with her the stories and wisdom that had connected Evelyn to family traditions extending back generations. "Grandpa," she said quietly, placing a small American flag beside his headstone, "I think you'd be proud of what your little Evie became. And I think you'd understand why I chose to serve the way I did." The wind across the cemetery carried with it the sense of sage and grass, the familiar aromas of a landscape that had remained unchanged despite everything that had happened in the larger world. Here, surrounded by the evidence of lives lived with purpose and meaning, Evelyn could feel the weight of her achievements settling into something manageable, something that honored both her exceptional capabilities and her fundamental humanity. 15 years later, the documentary crew from the History Channel had been following Evelyn around for 3 weeks, capturing footage for a program about American military snipers that would air during Veterans Day programming. At 33, now serving as a civilian contractor providing advanced training to special operations personnel, she had become the face of precision shooting, excellence in modern military operations. But what impressed the documentary producers most wasn't her technical competence or her military decorations. It was her insistence on addressing the ethical dimensions of extreme-range precision shooting, her commitment to ensuring that Marines developed both lethal skills and the moral foundation necessary to employ those skills responsibly. "What legacy do you want to leave?" the interviewer asked as they sat in her home office, surrounded by photographs that chronicled 15 years of military service and civilian success. Evelyn glanced at a framed picture on her desk, herself at 18, standing beside her grandfather on the day she had left for Marine Corps boot camp. The girl in the photograph looked impossibly young, filled with dreams and certainties that had been tested and refined by experiences she could never have imagined. "I want to be remembered as someone who proved that you can be extraordinarily competent at deadly skills while maintaining clear moral principles," she said finally. "I want people to understand that true military excellence isn't just about technical capability. It's about the wisdom to know when and how to employ that capability in service of values worth defending." The interviewer leaned forward, clearly interested in pursuing this line of discussion. "Do you think your approach has influenced how the military thinks about developing elite capabilities?" "I hope so. The Marines I've trained over the past 15 years have gone on to serve in every major conflict zone, and they've consistently demonstrated not just technical excellence, but ethical leadership under conditions where moral guidance isn't always clear." Evelyn stood and moved to the window, looking out at the Montana landscape that had first shaped her understanding of distance, precision, and patience. "That's what I'm most proud of, not the individual shots I made, but the institutional changes that have helped other Marines serve with both competence and conscience." 20 years later, the call came on a Thursday evening as Evelyn was preparing dinner for her family, her husband Mark, a fellow Marine veteran she had met during her final active duty assignment, and their twin daughters, now 16 and already showing signs of the determination and focus that had defined their mother's military career. "Mom, it's for you," her daughter Emily called from the living room. "Someone from the Marine Corps." The caller was Colonel Jennifer Hayes Private Martinez from her training program, now serving as the commanding officer of the 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company. Her voice carried both professional respect and personal warmth as she delivered news that would capstone Evelyn's relationship with the Marine Corps. "Ma'am, I'm calling to inform you that the Commandant has approved the establishment of the Thomas School of Advanced Precision Shooting at Marine Corps Base Quantico. It will be the Marine Corps' premier facility for training extreme-range precision shooters, and the Commandant has specifically requested that you serve as the school's first civilian director." Evelyn sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the realization that her name would be permanently associated with Marine Corps training excellence. The 18-year-old who had made an impossible shot to save her fellow Marines had evolved into an institutional legacy that would shape military training for generations. "Colonel Martinez, Jenny, that's incredible. But I'm not sure I'm the right person to..." "Ma'am, with respect, you're the only person who could do this job. You created the training methodologies we're using. You established the ethical standards that guide how we develop and employ these capabilities. You've spent 20 years proving that exceptional military competence and clear moral principles aren't contradictory, they're complementary." That evening, as Evelyn sat on her porch watching the sun set over the same Montana landscape that had first taught her about distance and patience, she reflected on the journey that had carried her from a rural farm to the highest levels of military recognition and institutional influence. The Barrett M82 that had started everything sat in a place of honor in her home office, no longer a tool of war, but a symbol of the principle that exceptional skills could be employed in service of values worth defending. Beside it hung her Navy Cross, the Bronze Star she had inherited from her grandfather, and photographs chronicling a military career that had redefined what was possible for Marine precision shooters. But the objects that meant the most to her were simpler: letters from Marines whose lives had been saved by her shooting, from students whose careers had been shaped by her training, from families whose futures had been protected by capabilities she had helped develop and institutionalized. 25 years later, the retirement ceremony at Marine Corps Base Quantico drew an audience that included active duty Marines, military leadership, government officials, and family members representing 5 generations of military service. At 38, Evelyn Thomas was stepping down as director of the institution that bore her name, transitioning to full retirement after a career that had spanned military service, civilian contracting, and educational leadership. "When I made my first Barrett shot 25 years ago," she told the assembled crowd, "I was an 18-year-old farm girl from Montana who thought military service meant following orders and doing your job with competence and honor. I never imagined that single shot would lead to a career devoted to developing the next generation of Marine precision shooters." The speech continued for 15 minutes, touching on themes of service, sacrifice, and the responsibility that came with exceptional capabilities. But what resonated most with the audience wasn't her military achievements or her institutional legacy. It was her insistence that true excellence required both technical competence and moral clarity. "The Marines who graduate from this school will carry forward capabilities that previous generations could only dream of," she concluded. "But more importantly, they'll carry forward the understanding that those capabilities exist to protect American lives and American values. That's the real legacy of the Thomas School, not just better shooters, but better Marines." As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Evelyn found herself approached by a young Marine whose bearing and equipment suggested recent graduation from advanced training programs. "Ma'am, I'm Second Lieutenant Sarah Peterson, granddaughter of the Chun who served with you in Afghanistan," the young officer said. "I wanted to thank you for the example you've set and the institution you've built. I graduated from the Thomas School last month, and I want you to know that your standards and your values are being carried forward by Marines who understand the weight of what they've been trained to do." Evelyn looked at the young lieutenant and saw echoes of her own 18-year-old self, the determination, The competence, the moral clarity that would guide her through whatever challenges military service would present. The circle was completing itself, with new generations of Marines carrying forward capabilities and values that had been forged in the mountains of Afghanistan and refined through decades of institutional development. Lieutenant Chun, what's the first thing they teach you at the Thomas School? That every shot you take is in service of protecting Marines who can't protect themselves, ma'am. And that exceptional capabilities come with exceptional responsibilities to use those capabilities wisely. Outstanding. Then my work here is done. As Evelyn Thomas drove away from Marine Corps Base Quantico for the final time as an official representative of the institution she had helped create, she reflected on the journey that had carried her from a single impossible shot to a legacy that would outlast her own lifetime. The weight of excellence had been transformed from a personal burden into an institutional strength, from individual achievement into collective capability that would serve the Marine Corps for generations. The 32-pound Barrett rifle that had started everything now resided in the Thomas School's museum, but its influence lived on in the training, standards, and values that shaped how future Marines would approach the intersection of lethal skills and moral responsibility. And somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, the wind still whispered across terrain where an 18-year-old Marine had reached across 2 miles of hostile territory and proved that impossible shots were simply shots that hadn't been taken yet by someone with the skills, courage, and moral clarity necessary to succeed when everything was on the line. The legend had become institutional memory. Personal achievement had become collective capability, and the farm girl from Montana had become a permanent part of Marine Corps history, not just for what she had accomplished, but for how she had chosen to accomplish it. This story required extensive research and dedication to bring you. If it moved you, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more remarkable military stories.